Good morning. Sexual addiction is a disease of the soul. It destroys the integrity, the heart, and the soul of the person who is acting out, and it breaks the spirit and rips a hole right through the heart of the spouses who love them. How do I know this? At the age of 39, I was a content, stay-at-home mother of 4 young children between the ages of 6 and 12, and in a 20-year relationship with the love of my life, when I received a phone call from my husband that destroyed my world as I knew it and everything that I believed in. He had been living a double life of sexual addiction. He was having faceless, anonymous sex throughout our entire relationship, and I had no idea. Before I get to that summer night in 1997, allow me to give you some personal background. I met my husband my junior year in college. He was a senior and heading off to medical school after graduation. We dated on and off for 8 years before we married and moved to a small coastal town in South Carolina. He eventually opened his own practice, which was very busy from the start. We had 4 children in 6 years, 3 girls and a boy. We were living a happy, busy, chaotic, prosperous, normal life, or so I thought. But as the years went by, it became obvious to me that my husband was running from something. I didn't know from what, or couldn't quite put my finger on why he was so restless, but something was just not quite right with him and with us as a couple. He began to be unaccountable with his time. He would call me after working all day and say he had to do rounds or dictate charts, which was completely believable given the responsibilities of growing a very busy practice. That is until the ER nurses started calling our home late at night, wondering where my husband was and why he wasn't answering his pages, which provoked denial from him, and anger and late-night fights from me. Plus, as our marriage developed, his growing lack of respect for me as his wife and for women in general became more and more obvious. He was becoming more openly flirtatious, staring too long or trying to make eye contact with other women right in front of me. After one particular humiliating incident where my husband was flirting unabashedly with another woman, I had enough. I gave him 2 weeks to go see a therapist to find out what was wrong with him, or he had to move out of the house. He did make an appointment with a therapist who promptly recommended he check into rehab immediately for substance abuse. I was stunned by that, but I didn't know that day what the therapist knew. A few days into my husband's inpatient treatment, he called me at home at around 10 p.m. He said he finally knew what was wrong with him. He said he was a sex addict and had been our entire married life, and that I needed to get tested for HIV immediately. I dropped the phone and fell to my knees. My life as I knew it was over. Shocked and numb, I went to see him a day or two later to meet with his inpatient treatment team and got a crash course in what sexual addiction was and how it applied to my husband specifically. In his book, Out of the Shadows, Patrick Carnes identifies 3 levels of sex addiction. Level 1 includes compulsive masturbation, pornography, strip clubs, prostitution, anonymous sex, and multiple affairs. My husband displayed most of the behaviors in level 1. I was left with these parting statistics, that we stood a 98% chance of divorce in the first year of our recovery, and my husband had a 95% chance of a sexual relapse within 5 years of his recovery. I returned home broken, traumatized, and plagued by the question I knew I had to answer for myself. How could I have possibly married a man who was living a complete double life behind my back? This question led me straight to therapy. So now I want to share with you today the 3 major turning points in my recovery life that helped heal my heart and soul and put me on the right path to rediscovering the woman I was always meant to be. The first point was individual therapy. I immediately started seeing a therapist who specialized in addiction, codependency, trauma, and was even newly trained in sexual addiction. Because he was a recovering addict himself, he had a plan for me more than just coming to his office once or twice a week. Whenever I would reach a stuck point in therapy, he would always have something new for me to try, like getting a sponsor or having a new accountability partner. My therapist also knew that as traumatized and as broken as I would be needing a lot more outside support. So his first assignment for me was to attend Al-Anon meetings 2 to 3 times a week. So my second turning point was attending self-help groups. At first I thought, why Al-Anon? My husband's not an alcoholic, he's a sex addict. Because there were no support groups for women like me in my community, my therapist insisted I try Al-Anon. My first couple of meetings, all I did was cry. My third meeting, I finally shared my first name. And with every new meeting I went to, I became more and more comfortable. It wasn't long before I began chairing meetings. Chairing got me out of my own pain and let me start to understand the concepts of service and giving back. Al-Anon is also where I first started grappling with the concepts of spirituality, of what and who my higher power was, of what taking personal responsibility was, and what letting go of people we love looks like, all really important elements of my adult life that were missing. My therapist also encouraged me to start going to a church, any church, every Sunday. He said, pick a church. I was raised Catholic, but didn't feel comfortable going back to the Catholic Church at that time, and my husband was Jewish in name only. So my therapist suggested his church, a non-denominational church where sometimes people shared their personal stories of brokenness, followed by seasons of triumph. Being a part of a church like this has led me to loving relationships and spiritually like-minded people. My women friends in particular have raised the bar in my life. They modeled what loving, mutually supportive relationships looked like in their own marriages. Most importantly, they showed me what it means to have a personal relationship with a higher power. So my third life change was establishing a personal relationship with my higher power. The question, why do I stay, danced around in my head every day. I battled ferociously with God on this question for the first few years of my recovery. Why can't I get a divorce, take him for everything we own, and start all over again, like everyone else around me seems to do? Of course, I knew, and the people close to me knew, that I had plenty of grounds for divorce, but I kept hearing a voice inside me whisper, "Not yet." Now, when you're challenged by people that you trust to just sit still and perhaps go against what society expects you to do, to take the road less traveled, it is a huge, frustrating challenge. To just sit still and listen to what God is telling you to do. All I can say is, I heard, "Not yet." And I keep hearing that to this day. In my book, A House Interrupted, I call those years the desert of my recovery, meaning no matter how many therapy sessions or meetings you go to, your life doesn't seem to change. It just stays so miserable. I finally left that season behind by watching and realizing that my husband was fully committed and serious in his own recovery. He was doing whatever humanly possible to make things right in our marriage and our family. My husband earned my trust back by years of being accountable to me, his sponsor, his therapist, and his recovery friends at every turn. I understood what it was like to surrender yourself completely, to realize that you are not in charge, especially of someone else's behavior, and what a relief that was. I was finally able to accept in my heart that my husband's brutal betrayal was not my fault. By forgiving my husband from my heart and not just from my head, a very hard-fought battle that took me almost 3.5 years to reach, and by taking personal responsibility for my own recovery, by starting the first Al-Anon group, which is for spouses and family members of sex addicts in our area, and by walking other women through the 12 steps of Al-Anon and Celebrate Recovery. I also have to say that if my husband had not gotten into recovery from the beginning or had opted out of recovery at any time, my marriage would never have survived. I'm going to end my talk today with a challenge for some of you. And my challenge to you is this: do not live one more day of your beautiful, unique life burdened by fear or shame or humiliation by what is going on behind the closed doors of your relationship. Thank you very much.